Alright, I'll admit it, I didn't ever expect to watch, let alone enjoy a show like Windbreaker. I went into it thinking that this was just going to be another dudes punching dudes story with not much depth, but I was way off. I ended up binging the entire first season in about 3 days since I had a lot of free time to kill and was pretty much hooked after episode 1, which not only sets the tone perfectly, but flipped the whole delinquent trope on its head. As far as the rest of the anime goes, it was really solid. The fights were very well choreographed and animated, and while the power system really is just two dudes punching each other, it felt like every punch had weight behind it, and I think that can be attributed to the incredible animation. Windbreaker gives fighting a purpose. The Bofurine guys don't just fight for no reason, they fight to protect the community that they live in, and then in turn that community does things to provide for them as a way of saying thanks. Personally, I think it would have been really easy for a series like this to be the usual stereotype that I expected, but I'm really glad it didn't because I think that makes it so much better. Another aspect of the series I enjoyed were the characters, because let's be real, even with really cool fights, if the characters sucked, then it wouldn't be good, it'd just be Jujutsu Kaisen. I like how unique each character felt. Despite having their key differences and personalities, they all share a pretty similar moral code and have a lot of respect for each other. The main cast is very well rounded, with everyone playing a key role and picking up the slack where others can't, which is especially true later in the season with Sakura, Suo, and Akihiko. Speaking of, Sakura is a really likable protagonist, and I personally found him quite relatable. While he has a tendency to act like a delinquent from time to time, he is a genuinely nice guy who has a solid heart for others, even if he's just really bad at expressing it. He puts up this tough guy act on the outside, but when it comes down to it, he ends up protecting people like Kotoha despite only knowing her for a few minutes. He even calls out the dudes who surrounded her as weak people pretending to be strong, which was honestly rightfully true, because who gangs up on a lady? Like, come on bro, it's 2024. Sakura gets a decent amount of character development in this first season, which I really appreciated, because I feel like sometimes the protagonist doesn't get anywhere off the bat, and we have to wait forever for there to be some kind of development. But Windbreaker doesn't do that. Sakura feels like a slightly better character at the end of season 1 because of everything he's already gone through. A point that keeps getting brought up with Sakura is his insistence to do things on his own without the help of others, and ultimately why that doesn't work. Coincidentally, this is one of the key themes of the entire series. Umemiya contrasts Sakura really well in this area, and it shows just how far he needs to come before he can actually be the strongest. And Umemiya is the strongest, yes, but he's also only that because he has the support of Bofurine, who will constantly back him up. He's also a good leader who leads by example rather than just ordering people around. When it's time to clean up the community, he's there in the trenches with everyone else and helping them out. His philosophy of a fight being a conversation with your fists is what makes each fight so engaging. You can see it in practice with the other guys when they fight, but it's especially apparent during Sakura's fight with Togame and Umemiya's fight with Tomiyama. Each of those fights end up conveying the story and, like I said earlier, giving a reason for each of these characters to fight rather than just throwing hands spontaneously. And that's actually one of the reasons I love My Hero Academia yet despise Jujutsu Kaisen. Both have really great fights, don't get me wrong, but in the case of Jujutsu Kaisen, most of them are just two sorcerers duking it out for no reason until one, or usually both, of them die. My Hero, on the other hand, intertwines the story with the fights. All Might and All for One aren't just fighting for funsies, it's an expression of their individual characters and a clashing of moral ideologies. Windbreaker isn't necessarily as deep as My Hero when it comes to fights, but it definitely leans more that way. Sakura does love fighting people, and that's usually his go-to when any sort of conflict arises, but he usually does it in response to a conflict with his own moral compass rather than a conflict with the actual person. Umemiya took his fight with Tomiyama seriously, but was almost more concerned with saving Tomiyama and helping him remember who he was rather than actually winning the fight. Now, back to the original point I was making before getting sidetracked, it's constantly brought up by multiple characters that Sakura simply cannot surpass Umemiya on his own merits, and he needs the support of others to do so. Which ultimately leads to him just needing to swallow his pride and ask for help when he needs it, which feeds back into what I was saying about the cast being so well-rounded. Sakura isn't good at remembering faces, but Akihiko is, and Sakura is also not great at talking to people, but Suo fits that bill perfectly. Everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses, which is what this theme of community is trying to get at, and something that I as a Christian can strongly relate to. I've had to do a lot of work personally to start letting people help me do things, and the main area where that crops up is making content like this. I've essentially lived by the phrase, if you want things done right, then you need to do it yourself, which doesn't work very well in a team setting, and this paired with a perfectionist attitude has led to a lot of unnecessary conflict. But recently, I've been getting better at it by realizing that I don't have to do everything. I used to do it all when making videos, but now I have editors and other people who help me, and while they don't do everything exactly the way I do, that's completely okay. While I do see a decent bit of myself in Sakura, I also realized how much easier life gets when you stop trying to do everything by yourself and let people help you. Another point I want to touch on is how this series puts emphasis on the strong versus the weak and how strength is everything. In Romans 15:1, it says, "We who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves." Granted, failings of the weak in this verse doesn't mean the weak are failures, but it more so ties into that previous idea of everyone having their own strengths and weaknesses. I think Bofurine is a great example of this verse as they use their strength to not only protect, but also uplift their community who don't necessarily have the capability to defend themselves. They also don't protect their community for their own gain. They do it because they have a genuine love for their neighbors and they want to see them thrive and succeed. This is all a part of sharing the love of Christ. It's shown and shared through your actions because Christ didn't sacrifice himself for personal gain. He did it because he loves and cherishes us and wants nothing more than for us to succeed and follow him. Now, while I have been praising Windbreaker for most of this video, there is one small, maybe even minute critique that I have, and it's I don't feel like they spent enough time at Furine, like, at all. I know that's a really weird complaint to have for a heavy action show, but I felt like every time we started getting settled in at school, some fight would pop up and pull us away from it. Maybe that'll change as the story goes on, and maybe the first season did do a good job of showing Furine off, but I missed it while binging. Who's to say? Aside from that though, I didn't really have any complaints with Windbreaker. I thought it was quite enjoyable, and I would definitely recommend you give it a watch. But let me know in the comments what you think about Windbreaker and whether or not you agree with me. As always, I love reading through your comments. If you enjoyed this video, you can feel free to drop a like and subscribe so I know to make more anime content like this. Now, speaking of, if you want to watch more, you can check out my review on Kaiju number 8 and how it defied my expectations, or my review of the Hashira training arc and how it nailed anime filler.